Welcome back to the fourth devlog for a game that I've been working on for about 2 months now. It's been over a month since the last devlog, since I've been working on a pretty big feature for the game. When I first started this project, I had no intention of adding multiplayer since it's a pretty complicated thing to add. In the past, whenever I tried adding multiplayer to my games, it ended up being a bit of a broken mess. Still, I'd come a long way since these projects, so I was pretty confident that this time I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. I mean, worst case scenario, I waste a few weeks and can go back to a backup I made, but if I succeed at adding multiplayer, it would make the game a whole lot more fun and would give me a lot more motivation to work on it. Especially with roguelikes, being able to work together with friends makes playing just infinitely more fun. And of course, I don't want to be working on a game that I wouldn't enjoy playing myself. Alright, once I convinced myself that this endeavor wouldn't be the death of this project, I started making preparations. One problem I kept facing is spending way too much time testing new features I added. Every time I added a new item, I'd literally have to go into the dungeon and try and find it for me to test it out. Or I'd have to wait for enemies to spawn in a wave after I add them. This was just a super slow and inefficient way of doing things, so I added a console with a super simple way to add commands for it. All I have to do to add a new command is just add this bit of code above any function, and then when I type a slash followed by the keyword, that piece of code runs. So I added some commands. /God to make myself invincible, /insert item to give myself items, /spawn to spawn enemies, /regen to regenerate the map, along with quite a few others. Obviously you won't normally be able to use all these cheaty commands. Still, these commands are great for testing. In just a month, these commands saved me so much time, and I honestly should have added them a long time ago. Moving on from that, one thing I got sidetracked with is adding these little money pieces that drop instead of just adding money to your inventory, and they turned out super satisfying. The next problem I had is that towers, enemies, and the player all did very similar things but were programmed separately, which was basically tripling the amount of work I needed to do in some situations. And if I was going to be adding multiplayer, it only made sense to fix this as soon as possible. If you look at another roguelike game, Risk of Rain 2, enemies are set up a lot like players, which is why at certain times, enemies can have fully functioning items equipped just like the player. I decided to add a system like this to my game, so now all towers, enemies, and players fall under the same category of game entity. All game entities can shoot and take damage, and have stats just like the player. At the same time, I decided to add an effect system so I can add custom-made things that can be inflicted onto game entities. Next, I went and added some items that took advantage of this new effect system. The spear is honestly my favorite. When you activate the ability, you poison enemies when you hit them, and you also gain a lot of attack speed and move speed. This next one is a hammer, which creates a big AoE zone whenever it hits the first enemy. This makes it super good for large groups of enemies, but kinda hard to hit on moving targets. And finally, there's a dagger, which shoots fast and has a chance to critically strike, as well as giving you a dash ability that temporarily increases your dodge chance. Along with this, there's also a new stat that reduces your ability cooldowns. Overall, these new weapons make combat feel a lot more interesting, but they do still need some work. I also took a suggestion from this comment and added 2 new items that each grant large boosts to different stats when you activate them. It's especially fun to combine multiple of them together since you can really just turn yourself into an unstoppable machine for a few seconds. Alright, at this point I was finally ready to add co-op multiplayer. I decided to use mirror networking for this since it's what I've already used in the past, so I'm not going to have to repeat figuring so much stuff out. The first thing I did is made this little connect screen where players can either choose to host a new lobby or join an existing one through an IP address. At some point I am going to add Steam multiplayer support, but I've decided to save figuring that out for when I'm closer to actually releasing the game. Anyways, once a player either chooses to host or join a lobby that somebody else created, they're brought to this screen where everybody can select their usernames and then the host can click the play button when everyone's ready. At some point I'll probably add cosmetics so that people can tell each other apart, but for now I'll just focus on actually finishing multiplayer. Alright, so all the host has to do is press the play button and then... Obviously I'm joking, I wish it was that simple. At this point I basically had to go through everything in the game and make sure that works properly in multiplayer. I decided to start with game entities just because they're such a big part of the game. I made it so that all entities' current health and position are sent across the network. Next I made sure that their animations work properly instead of things just hovering everywhere. After that I got projectiles working and entities were basically completely functional. Time to move on to making the dungeon work. So yeah, right after I finished making a ton of changes to game entities, I went and deleted the script before I even backed it up. Luckily I backed it up on Git just a few hours before, so I didn't have to rewrite the entire thing, but it still sucked and took me like an hour to get back to where I was. It even asked me, "Are you sure?" and I somehow still managed to delete one of the most important scripts in my project. Just to add insult to injury, while I was recording this clip for the video, I found out that Unity puts all deleted files in the recycle bin. So I wasted an hour for nothing. Moving on from that incident, next I made the dungeon sync across clients. I made it so that when the host generates the map, the rooms are spawned on the network along with the minimap shape and which doorways are open. I also had to make a system to prevent entities that are in separate rooms from interacting with one another. To finish off the dungeon, I got items and moving on to the next floor of the dungeon working well. The last big feature to add was towers. This was pretty simple since, again, towers are game entities, so most of the work had already been done. All I really had to do was make the placement work. The final thing I did was made it so that players can send chat messages to each other, and at that point it was basically all ready. I built the game and sent it to my friends to test it out. This is gonna be so cool and especially bug-free. Let's go! Well, it was cool, but it didn't exactly end up being bug-free. For some reason, the third and fourth players couldn't see anything and they'd just be stuck in the ghost dimension. Sometimes there would be these chests that when you touch them, you get insta disconnected. You also couldn't use item abilities if you weren't the host, just to name a few. Anyways, I spent a couple days just bug fixing and testing out the multiplayer, until I was finally to the point that I could play multiple games without finding a single bug. So I figured I'd show you guys how the game actually plays now, since I haven't really shown that yet. Not letting any time go to waste, we instantly enter the dungeon and start looking around. We each go different ways so we don't have to share any items. Unfortunately, there aren't very many variants of rooms right now, so it is pretty common to get repeats. I found the ladder room, but I didn't use it right away since I wanted to see what was in the other room. And sure enough, there was a frost tower, which was definitely worth my time. On the next floor, we did the same thing for about a minute until it was time to head back to the arena and fight the waves of enemies. Back in the arena, we try our best to preserve our crystal's health until we can find another time to go into the dungeon. After killing all these enemies, we'll have a lot more money to spend on items in the shops. The sword that I got right away was actually way too strong, which is something that I'll definitely need to tweak. Unfortunately, we didn't get very many towers in this run, which forced us to stay in the arena for a lot longer than we'd have liked to. I'm super happy that we have this core gameplay loop figured out from very early on, but it does need some more tweaking to feel well designed. Another thing that's obvious is that there isn't very much variety in the game right now. This is something that I have practically endless ideas on how to fix. There's so much room to add new content and game mechanics. Of course, if any of you have any suggestions in that regard, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching through to the very end. If this game looks interesting to you and you'd like to follow its development, don't hesitate to subscribe, as I'll be posting new devlogs just like this one every time I add new content or features. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Later!